Some friendships are formed in the ordinary way. Shared classes, shared neighborhoods, shared phases of life that eventually end and leave the friendship feeling like a relic of who you used to be. And then there are the other kind, the ones forged in ambition, in shared vision, in the particular heat of two people who look at each other and say, without saying it out loud, "You see what I see. You want what I want. Let's go get it." That's what Daniel and Marcus had. Or at least, that's what Daniel believed they had. They met at 19, freshman year of college, during an orientation event they'd both wandered into by accident. They ended up sitting next to each other and complaining in that low-voiced way college students do about the entire proceedings. That conversation lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, they had covered their families, their ambitions, their mutual distrust of anyone who seemed too comfortable with the status quo, and their shared conviction that working for someone else was a temporary condition they intended to escape as quickly as possible. They walked out of that building as friends, the kind of friends who talk every day. Daniel was studying graphic design with a focus on branding. Marcus was studying finance with a focus on deal-making. They used to joke that together they covered both halves of a business, the part that made things beautiful and the part that made things profitable. It wasn't just a joke, it was a plan. They spent 2 years talking about what they would build. They had notebooks full of ideas, Daniel's covered in sketches, Marcus's covered in numbers. During senior year, they started taking on small freelance projects together, testing the model. A logo here, a social media package there. Nothing that would pay rent, but enough to prove that what they could do together was better than what either of them could do alone. At 24, they stopped talking and started doing. Apex Creative Group launched out of Marcus's apartment. 2 laptops, 1 shared Dropbox, a logo Daniel designed in a weekend, and a client list that started at 0. The first 3 months were genuinely hard. Not romantically hard, not startup montage hard, but the kind of hard where you question every decision you've made and lie awake doing math that never quite works out. But they stayed in it. They took every meeting, pitched every prospect, said yes to projects they weren't sure they could deliver on, and then figured out how to deliver on them. By year 2, they had their first real office, a single room in a shared co-working space, and 6 steady clients. By year 3, they'd outgrown the co-working space, hired their first 2 full-time employees, and signed a lease on an actual office with their company name on the door. That day, they took a photo in front of the building. Daniel still has it. By year 5, Apex had 43 clients, 12 employees, and a reputation in their city as the agency you went to when you wanted creative work that actually converted. They had built something real, something that mattered. Daniel was proud of it in a way he'd never felt proud of anything else in his life, and Marcus had been quietly dismantling it for over a year. The thing about betrayal when it comes from someone you love is that it doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't announce itself with a change in weather or a shift in the light. It arrives in the gaps, in the moments you explain away, in the questions you don't ask because you don't want to seem paranoid, in the small adjustments you make to your own perception so that the picture in front of you stays comfortable. That's what Daniel did. For months, maybe longer, he made small adjustments. He noticed that Marcus had started taking more calls away from his desk. He noticed a second laptop that appeared in Marcus's bag around the middle of year 4. A personal machine, Marcus said, because he liked to keep his personal browsing separate from work. Reasonable. Daniel accepted it. He noticed that Marcus had started arriving to their weekly partner meetings a few minutes late, which was new, and seemed slightly distracted during them, which was newer. He noticed that Marcus had started being vague about certain client conversations, still in discussions, working on the details. I'll loop you in once it solidifies. Reasonable too. They'd always divided the client relationship management somewhat loosely. What Daniel didn't notice, because he wasn't looking for it, because it didn't occur to him to look, was that Marcus had incorporated a new LLC 14 months earlier. The filing was public record. It just wasn't the kind of thing you search for when you trust someone completely. The invoice that broke everything open was item 41 in a batch of accounts payable Daniel reviewed on a Wednesday evening in October. He'd stayed late to clear a backlog of administrative work, the kind of thing that piles up when you're running a business and no one has time for the unglamorous parts. He was tired. He almost stopped at item 38. Item 41 was a payment of $6,000 to an entity called Brightline Creative Services for creative production, Q3 deliverables. The client code attached to it was one Daniel didn't recognize. The payee was a company he'd never heard of. And the nature of the payment, Apex paying another creative agency for creative work, made no sense for a company whose entire value proposition was doing that work themselves. He flagged it in his notes, told himself he'd ask Marcus about it in the morning. He didn't sleep that night. Not because he knew, not yet, but because some part of him, the part that had been quietly absorbing all those small adjustments for months, understood that the answer Marcus would give him in the morning would either resolve everything or confirm something he didn't want to confirm. And he wasn't sure which outcome he was more afraid of. By 3 a.m, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to ask Marcus first. He called a forensic accountant the next day. Not their shared CPA, a separate firm, one he found through an attorney referral, paying out of his personal account. He told them he needed a full review of 5 years of company financials with an emphasis on the past 18 months. He told them he needed it done quietly. He told them to call his cell phone only. What they found took 11 days to fully map. Daniel got the preliminary summary on a Tuesday and read it in his car in a parking structure because he didn't trust himself to keep a neutral expression anywhere else. Marcus had incorporated Brightline Creative Services 14 months prior. Over the following year, he had used that entity to redirect 6 client contracts, existing Apex clients, clients Daniel had helped acquire and service, moving them under Brightline's umbrella through a series of contract amendments and restructuring conversations that Marcus had conducted without Daniel's knowledge or signature. The revenue from those 6 clients, ongoing monthly retainer fees, project billings, performance bonuses, had been flowing not into Apex's accounts, but into Brightline's, which Marcus controlled exclusively. The total diverted over 14 months, $212,000. Beyond the revenue, Marcus had spent the previous year quietly repositioning Apex's vendor relationships. The preferred print production house they'd used for 3 years had been switched to a new account, one tied to Brightline's billing information. The video production partner, the web hosting platform, the freelance illustration network they relied on, each one gradually migrated to contacts and accounts that Marcus, not Apex, controlled. He was building the infrastructure of a parallel business using Apex's relationships, Apex's credibility, and Apex's money. And in the last 90 days, he had begun making direct contact with 4 of Apex's largest remaining clients, clients who together represented nearly 40% of the company's monthly revenue, positioning himself as going independent and offering to continue managing their accounts personally at a rate slightly below what they currently paid Apex. He had a timeline. Daniel could see it clearly in the forensic report. The quiet escalation of each step, the careful sequencing. Marcus had planned to be fully extracted within another 3 months. He would have walked out the door with the clients, the revenue, the vendor relationships, and the infrastructure. What he would have left behind was the lease, the employees, the overhead, and Daniel, holding the name of a company that had been hollowed out from the inside. Daniel's attorney was unambiguous about the legal exposure. What Marcus had done was not a breach of professional ethics or a gray area partnership dispute. It was fraud. It was conversion of business assets. The client redirections potentially constituted tortious interference. And the pattern, the deliberate, sustained, methodical nature of it, would not be difficult to demonstrate. The attorney's advice was equally unambiguous. Do not confront Marcus yet. Do not tip him off. Move first, move carefully, and move to protect the assets before giving him any reason to accelerate his timeline or obscure the paper trail further. So Daniel did the hardest thing he has ever done in his professional life. He went back to work. For 3 weeks, he sat across from Marcus every day. He attended their partner meetings. He reviewed client work together. He talked about Q4 projections and whether they should expand the design team and what they were doing for the company holiday party. He laughed at Marcus's jokes. He covered for him when he stepped out for one of his private calls. "Marcus is in a client meeting. Can I help?" Because he needed Marcus to believe that nothing had changed. He has said in the time since that those 3 weeks were the loneliest of his life. Not because he was alone. He had his attorney, his forensic accountant, the small circle of people who knew what was happening. But because he was performing normalcy with a person he'd loved for half his life, and the performance required him to keep that love somewhere inaccessible, somewhere it wouldn't show on his face as grief, for 21 consecutive days. He cried twice. Once in his car after the meeting where his attorney laid out the full scope of the damage in plain terms. Once at 2 a.m, reading a contract amendment Marcus had prepared, with a redirect clause buried in Section 7 that Daniel's signature had never been on. He didn't let himself cry anywhere else. He couldn't afford to. During those 3 weeks, working in parallel with his legal team, Daniel did the following. He contacted the 4 major clients Marcus had approached and informed them, professionally, without accusation, with documentation, that there was an ongoing partnership matter that would affect account management, and that they should hold on any commitments until it was resolved. 3 of the 4 agreed to wait. 1 had already signed with Brightline. He couldn't get that one back. He filed the necessary legal documents to freeze the business assets and establish his sole authority over key accounts during the dispute period. He changed the administrative passwords on the company's core platforms, email, project management, billing, on the Thursday before the conference room meeting, after hours, after Marcus had left for the day. And he scheduled the meeting. He sent Marcus a calendar invite for Thursday at 9. Subject line, Q4 strategy plus new client opportunity. The kind of meeting they'd had 100 times. Marcus accepted within 20 minutes. When Marcus walked into the conference room and saw the attorney sitting at the table, Daniel watched his face. He has thought about that moment many times since. The expression that crossed Marcus's face in the 2 or 3 seconds before he composed himself, it wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear exactly. It was something closer to resignation. Like a person who has been waiting for a particular outcome and upon its arrival finds they have nothing left to say in its defense. Daniel didn't say much. He said, "Marcus, we've completed a forensic review of the past 14 months. I'd like you to look at what we found before anyone says anything." He slid the folder across the table. Marcus looked at it for a long time. He turned pages slowly. He didn't look up. When he finally did, Daniel was watching him, and what Marcus saw on Daniel's face was not rage and not grief, but something quieter and more final. The expression of a person who already knows and has already decided and is simply here to close the door. Marcus had nothing to say. Not a defense, not a denial, not an explanation. He sat in that conference room for 40 minutes while the attorney outlined the legal position, and he said almost nothing. At one point he said, very quietly, "I was going to tell you." Daniel did not respond to that. The legal process took 4 months. Marcus did not contest the core findings. The documentation was too complete. The Shell LLC was dissolved. 4 of the 6 redirected clients were formally returned to Apex through mediated agreements. The other 2 had signed contracts with Brightline that made recovery legally complicated and practically not worth the cost of pursuing. The $212,000 in diverted revenue was partially recovered, roughly 60% after legal fees and settlement costs. The partnership was dissolved. Apex Creative Group was restructured as a sole proprietorship under Daniel's ownership. He kept the name. He kept the office. He kept 9 of the 12 employees who stayed when he sat them down and told them the truth. Not the version that would make him look best, but the version that was actually true. Marcus and Daniel have not spoken since the conference room. Daniel does not expect that to change. What Daniel has said, to the people who know this story and ask him how he's doing now, is that the hardest part was not the money, and not the legal process, and not even the friendship. The hardest part was the realization that the friendship had been a resource Marcus was managing. That all those years of shared vision and late nights and handshake deals and genuine laughter, Marcus had experienced all of it, and had also, at some point, decided that it was worth less than an exit strategy. Daniel has rebuilt. The clients who came back stayed. He's hired 2 new people. The company is smaller than it was at its peak, but it's solid in a way it wasn't before, because now Daniel knows every number, controls every account, and has earned, at significant cost, a clarity about trust that he didn't have when he was 24, and certain that the right friendship could be the foundation of everything. He's not cynical. That's the part that might surprise you. He still believes in partnership. He still believes in building something with someone you love. He just believes now that love and trust are not the same thing, and that trust is something you verify, not because you expect to find betrayal, but because the cost of not looking when the wrong person is across the table is higher than you can afford to pay. The invoice was item 41. He almost didn't look at it. Pay attention to what doesn't add up. Not because everyone is Marcus, but because the one time it matters, you'll be glad you did.